50 years ago, America declared a war on drugs.
Every time we have a war on something, we always have more of what we're going to war against.
And that inexhaustible supply of illicit drugs has left nearly 1 million Americans dead.
It's just gonna go on. It's just gonna keep going on.
And the biggest drug dealers aren't standing on street corners. They're sitting in boardrooms.
These companies knew where these products were going, and they knew it was being abused.
Billions in profits off the suffering of the addicted. Secret deals and government cover-ups.
The government of Afghanistan was a government of drug dealers. The U.S. turned a blind eye to that reality.
It's an endless war with an ever-rising body count.
We're losing people left and right. Can we get ahead of this thing? I don't know.
For over 70 years, our leaders have told us one thing under the bright lights.
The protection of the lives and property of Americans is the responsibility of all public officials.
I care. We're trying.
We have it so well under control.
Help is here, and we will not stop working for you.
But for decades, America's shadow government and its powerful friends have spent trillions of dollars on an agenda that serves their interests, not ours.
You guys paid for all this.
So when the shit really hits the fan, we're on our own.
This is not science fiction. This is reality in America right now.
The truth is, the rich and powerful will do whatever it takes to save themselves, while the rest of us die. The Kensington neighborhood in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Anybody want some snacks? We got snacks.
It's notorious for being the largest open-air drug market on the East Coast.
Well, Philadelphia police say a bad batch of heroin is to blame for 6 deadly overdoses today. Most of the overdoses happened in the area of Kensington Avenue and Cambria Street.
Kensington has been at the center of one addiction epidemic after another. From heroin to crack cocaine to the opioid era to the return of heroin we're living in now.
You need some water? So we have some chips, we have some socks. What do you need?
For years, Rosalind Pichardo has been a guardian angel to drug users here.
What's up, sunshine?
Handing out socks, Slim Jims, and Narcan, a drug that reverses overdoses.
Do you need some Narcan in case someone needs it? Thank you. Thank you for carrying it. I appreciate you. This is a Bible that I keep track of every overdose that I reverse. I've logged in here 628 overdose reversals. So this was on OD on the train. I gave him 4 Narcans, and he didn't make it. He died. So that was my first person that I lost.
To most of us, Kensington is what the front line of America's war on drugs looks like. But in truth, this is where the war should be fought. An ostentatious world inhabited by America's most notorious drug-dealing family. The Sackler family, scions of a pharmaceutical dynasty. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have become addicted to the pills made by their company, Big Pharma. Over 700,000 people have suffered opioid-related deaths. But the Sacklers have gone to great lengths to make sure that when you hear the family name, you think of glitz, glamour, and high culture. You may have toured one of the major art museums housing the Sackler family collection.
The Sackler name is kind of emblazoned in gold letters on museums across the world. There are Sackler wings at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Guggenheim, the Natural History Museum, the Tate Modern in London, the Louvre in Paris.
The family's wealth goes back generations. This is Arthur Sackler, patriarch, one of the world's foremost collectors of Chinese art. and a marketing mastermind. He spent his career currying favors and amassing power and wealth and helping rewrite the rules for Big Pharma.
Arthur Sackler was a pioneer in the field of pharmaceutical advertising.
Valium works promptly to relieve excessive anxiety and apprehension. Valium, for the response you know, want, and trust.
Along with his knack for marketing, Arthur understood what medications would appeal to an increasingly stressed out population.
Arthur thought that there was a lot of money to be made in prescribing an anti-anxiety medication for women. And that is how Valium got its reputation as mother's little helper.
Arthur's younger brothers followed his lead. In the 1950s, Mortimer and Raymond Sackler bought a pharmaceutical company that would become Purdue Pharma, turning their family business into an empire at a time when mainstream America first begins to warm to the idea of mood-altering drugs.
Today, medical science recognizes that some folks aren't helped by relaxing exercises. In cases of difficult tension and nervous apprehension, doctors are now prescribing medicine.
The Sacklers' breakthrough is a time-release coating for oral medications. It's called the Contin system, short for continuous. Purdue tests it on a pill to treat asthma, but the pill's a flop. So the Sacklers are eager to find a new application for their groundbreaking technology.
So the concept was, what if we could use this Contin system, this time-release form of a drug, and combine it with morphine? A terminally ill patient could just take one pill, and the pain relief would last long enough to get them all the way through the night. So this was the birth of what came to be known as MS Contin.
But the morphine in MS Contin is an opioid chemical derived from a poppy plant.
Its pods contain a milky fluid that for centuries provided the raw material for one of the most demoralizing and dissipating vices in the world.
The same as heroin. And it didn't take long for the Sacklers' new wonder drug to land on the streets.
MS Contin, even as early as the late 80s and into the 90s, it was a very prized drug for heroin addicts. And what drug addicts figured out is that if you just kind of sucked off the time-release coating on the exterior, or alternatively, if you crushed it up and snorted it, you get the full payload of the drug all at once.
In the early 90s, as the pill designed for terminal cancer patients becomes a street drug of choice, the Sacklers company earns millions. But Purdue Pharma has a problem. Not that their creation is being abused, but that the patent on the drug is about to expire.
They start to search around for some other drug that might replace MS Contin as a steady, reliable stream of revenue for the family.
This is where the next generation of Sacklers takes over. Mortimer's daughter, Kathy, and Raymond's son, Richard, used the company's time-release tech on an opioid called oxycodone.
Oxycodone was not invented by the Sacklers. It had been invented in the 1920s, actually.
But by combining it with their Contin system, the Sacklers create OxyContin. And like their Uncle Arthur did with Valium, they get creative in how and when it can be prescribed.
They would market it as a cure for any problem you might be having, for toothaches, for menstrual pain, for back pain, for headaches. It's only, I think a matter of a couple years before it generates $1 billion in sales, and then it goes on to generate $30 billion in sales over the course of its life.
A 12-hour, time-released, non-addictive painkiller. Except it's not.
OxyContin does not actually last 12 hours. It might only last 8 hours, or for many people, only 6 or even 5 hours.
So if you took the drug as directed, you were going to experience withdrawal and pain and craving, and then you were going to experience relief when you took your drug again, right? And that experience is what gets people hooked.
OxyContin is highly addictive, and the company later admits to knowing it, but they still lobby the Federal Drug Administration to label it as safe.
One of the Sacklers' great talents is that they are very skilled in the dark arts of regulatory capture. Regulatory capture basically means when business interests lobby the government to make regulations and rulings that help create essentially a monopoly. And one of the things that Purdue managed to do was to get the FDA to include this kind of astonishing claim that because OxyContin was a time-release pill, that time-release mechanisms were believed to reduce the abuse liability of a medication. Addicts don't want a slow time-release hit. They want it all at once.
Some patients may be afraid of taking opioids because they're perceived as too strong or addictive. But that is far from actual fact. Less than 1% of patients taking opioids actually become addicted.
Now, this was nonsense. The company knew how easy it was to circumvent the time-release shell. This particular claim of lower abuse liability had never been allowed before and has never been allowed since for an opioid medication.
The Sacklers were quick to reward the man who helped get their drug labeled as non-addictive.
The actual person at the FDA who approved the OxyContin application is a guy named Curtis Wright. And Curtis Wright ended up leaving the FDA after OxyContin was approved and then came to work at Purdue, where he reportedly earned a salary of more than $400,000 a year.
Crucial to the scheme's success, doctors, the very people we trust with our health. Many were incentivized by the Sacklers' marketing team to prescribe more and more pills to patients.
They would host fancy getaways for the weekend. They would actually pay doctors directly, getting them on the Purdue payroll by inviting them to participate in what they called the Purdue Speakers Bureau, the system where you ask one of the doctors to give maybe a 10-minute presentation at the beginning, and at the end you hand them a check for $500 or $1,000.
And doctors weren't the only ones getting money from the Sacklers.
Purdue and the Sacklers personally would donate repeatedly to politicians over the years.
It all cleared the way for the tragedy to come.
As OxyContin sales start to take off in 1999 and 2000 and 2001, we start to get reports, particularly in rural areas, that abuse of this drug is becoming widespread. The crime rate spikes, overdose deaths start to pile up.
These are the latest pharmacy robbers on the run tonight, suspected of holding up 11 different shops, mostly mom and pop pharmacies for OxyContin.
And it really starts to fray the social fabric.
These people that are doing these robberies are severe addicts. They don't want to hurt anybody. All they want is their next fix.
As opioid deaths continued to rise, the reality of the worst drug addiction epidemic in America's history became impossible for anyone to deny, except the Sacklers. In a recently released 2015 deposition tape the family had tried to bury for years, Richard Sackler appears unrepentant about the company's business practices.
Do you believe Purdue's marketing was overly aggressive?
No.
Do you believe Purdue's marketing was appropriate?
I believe so.
Purdue Pharma wasn't the only bad actor in the opioid crisis. In the 2000s, greed was a contagion that affected some of the biggest corporations in the country.
These companies knew where these products were going. It was not a bad judgment, a mistake. They knew exactly where it was going, and they knew it was being abused. It was all about the bucks.
We're in Kensington, Philadelphia, heavily infested drug area.
What's crazy is the most part, I'd say about 80% of the people down here ain't even from down here. They just come here and get stuck, like flypaper.
For decades, Big Pharma raked in billions on prescription painkillers, trapping millions of Americans in the vice-like grip of addiction. These prescription pills entered communities through a sophisticated distribution network designed by pharmaceutical companies for ruthless efficiency.
How easy was it to get pills?
It's very easy. Like, so many ways you can get your hands on pills. So now they try to make the pills where you can't crush them and like snort them. But that most people turn to heroin anyway.
Do you think that the big drug companies that make Oxy, are they just as big of a drug dealer as a guy in the street?
Just legal. It's this legal drug dealer.
Kermit, West Virginia. Population 392. How many prescription opioids do you think made their way into a single pharmacy here over the course of 2 years? 100? 100,000? A million? The answer is 9 million. And if you don't believe these arrived in Kermit by lawful means, well, neither did the DEA.
Overdoses are occurring. West Virginia was leading the country in overdoses on a per capita basis.
Former manager at the DEA's Diversion Control Division, James Geldof, still gets emotional describing his up-close and personal exposure to the opioid epidemic.
So there was a town hall meeting I attended in Portsmouth, Ohio in early June of 2011. There was mothers, fathers, and grandparents of who died of overdoses. And the chief of police at one point in the meeting turned off all the lights in the gym and showed pictures of these kids. Prom pictures, homecoming, graduation pictures, football jerseys, all of them young, and they were dead before they had a chance to live.
Seeing the carnage the pills were causing in small-town America, Geldof began focusing on the pharmaceutical distributors, the shadow pushers in the new drug trade. The top companies, McKesson, Cardinal, AmerisourceBergen, are three of the largest corporations in America, controlling around 85% of Big Pharma's distribution.
And it was also done by companies that, frankly, if you'd have told me in 1972 when I started they'd be involved in this kind of behavior, I wouldn't have believed it. Some of these companies were the blue bloods of the industry.
But with the internet came online pharmacies and a vast, virtually unregulated new distribution network for dangerous pharmaceuticals, some shipping millions of pills a year.
When you see that kind of quantity, it's obvious that nobody's paying attention. There's no way somebody could think those kind of quantities would be used legitimately.
But when the DEA begins cracking down on online pharmacies in the early 2000s, addicts begin standing in line at so-called pill mills, one-stop shops that combine a doctor's office and a pharmacy.
Pill mills were operated by doctors, so you would go in there, you'd pay for an office visit, could be $200, whatever it might be, and then you'd get a script, and then of course you'd take it to the pharmacy and fill it.
And these pill mills will supercharge an already growing opioid epidemic that spreads across the country.
The doctors that were working in these pill mills were essentially drug dealers. We considered them criminals, and we approached the investigation as a criminal investigation.
Federal agents raided the Total Medical Express clinic today, seizing files and computers.
We never thought we would be going into doctors' offices, and that's a very honorable profession, and unfortunately some folks throughout the country have brought dishonor to that profession.
Twin brothers Chris and Jeff George operated 4 pill mills in Florida.
Confiscated vehicles seized by authorities earlier, Vipers, Bentleys, Mercedes, all paid for in cash from suspected pill mill operators.
At the center of all this is Jeff George, who will face murder charges. Prosecutors say he and his twin brother Christopher ran a $40 million criminal enterprise.
But he's in trouble.
In 3 years, the brothers moved an estimated 20 million pills before finally being busted in 2010.
Boxes of supplies and interviewed staff as
And they were just 2 guys in a single state. Shutting down the pill mills was like stamping out a campfire when the forest is already in flames.
He says it's a pill mill, you know?
Is it?
Don't say anything. Don't say anything. Don't say anything.
So the DEA looked to stop the pills at their source. Distribution companies were required to inform the DEA of suspicious deliveries, but they often stayed silent.
The most common excuses we heard from the wholesalers is basically they were just delivery boys. They knew exactly where it was going, and they knew it was being abused.
Purdue did keep a list internally of doctors that they suspected were involved in black market diversion. They called it List Zero. And anytime a sales rep would start to suspect that a doctor maybe was involved in diversion, they'd be added to this list. Sometimes they would continue selling to that doctor. Sometimes they would stop selling to that doctor, but what they never did was share that list with law enforcement.
The users were addicted to the drugs, and the drug companies and distributors were addicted to the steady flow of cash. And in 2016, the federal government even passed a law that made it more difficult for the DEA to do anything about it. Sold as a way to ensure patients access to needed pain medications while also improving enforcement, Representatives Tom Marino and Marsha Blackburn introduced H.R. 471. Few noticed that buried in the bill were provisions that would instead put a stranglehold on the DEA by raising the burden of proof its agents needed to launch investigations of large prescription drug shipments they found suspicious. Geldof's boss confronted Congresswoman Blackburn.
16,651 people in 2010 died of opiate overdose, okay? Opiate-associated overdose. This is not a game. We're not playing a game here.
Nobody is saying it is a game, sir. We're just trying to craft some legislation.
The legislation passed by unanimous consent and was signed into law by President Obama, with little attention paid to the fact that Marino and Blackburn together had received nearly $1 million in campaign donations from the pharmaceutical and health industries. The effect on the DEA's diversion control was devastating.
The cases became more difficult to make. Chief Counsel kept requiring more and more evidence to make these cases.
So how does an anti-opioid addiction bill end up limiting the DEA's powers, leading to more addiction?
Controlled substances and listed.
It helped that a former DEA attorney, Lyndon Barber, reportedly helped craft the legislation so it aided his new client, pharmaceutical distributor Cardinal Health.
Agile DEA compliance program. If you have a DEA compliance issue, or you're facing a government investigation, or you're having administrative or civil litigation involving the Controlled Substances Act, I'd be happy to hear from you.
I did lose respect for Lyndon at that point. There was no reason for that legislation to pass.
As it got harder for the DEA to enforce the law, the wreckage from opioid abuse grew.
The opioid crisis was in full bloom. If you're going to do anything, if you're going to err on the side of anything, you got people dying here. These aren't record-keeping violations. These are pills that are winding up on the street.
By the late aughts, nearly 50,000 Americans are dying each year from opioid abuse, triple the number from just a decade earlier. So many die that the average American's life expectancy drops by nearly a year.
Addiction to prescription opioids has caused people to turn to cheaper narcotics like heroin.
And soon, the Big Pharma-fueled opioid epidemic will give rise to the tragic return of heroin, a drug whose dark history is directly tied to the U.S. government's overseas wars.
If your primary goal is fighting communism and your secondary goal is fighting drugs, then maybe you've got to subordinate your goal of fighting drugs to the higher good of fighting communism.
Our country's leaders have spoken out for years about the dangers of illegal drugs in America.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions. They're killing our children.
Fine-tuning the message as the drug of choice changed.
This is crack cocaine, seized a few days ago by drug enforcement agents in a park just across the street from the White House.
And yet, even as presidents spoke out against drugs, their administrations helped fuel every major addiction epidemic.
The only answer to communism is a massive offensive for freedom. Freedom from hunger, from disease, and a victory for the ageless hope of people everywhere. Freedom from tyranny.
As the U.S. and the Soviet Union battled for geopolitical dominance, the CIA formed strange alliances abroad, shaking hands with some of the world's most notorious drug traffickers in the name of democracy.
Communism and socialism. What can we do about it?
At the end of World War II, the U.S. is concerned that more and more countries are going to go socialist, go communist. And in France, it looked like the communists might actually be able to win national elections. They controlled Marseille.
France has become the battleground for clashing ideologies. Maurice Thorez leads the communists in an open fight between two political extremes.
the CIA starts allying with the Corsican Marseille Mafia to use them as a kind of terror force against the communists. And part of that alliance with these gangsters in southern France involves turning a blind eye and even facilitating their importation of heroin from Southeast Asia.
I think that what this puts into relief are evils of politics. You've got to break some eggs to make some omelets. If your primary goal is fighting communism and your secondary goal is fighting drugs, then maybe you've got to subordinate your goal of fighting drugs to the higher good of fighting communism.
Years later, America's war against communism and its partnership with the drug trade extended to Southeast Asia itself.
As the war in Vietnam is ramping up and the U.S. role in that war is increasing, there are these off-the-book wars in Laos in particular. And that war involves the training by the CIA of hill tribes, particularly the Hmong, as a mercenary force to fight the Pathet Lao, which were a communist force in Laos. And one of the ways that that war was conducted and funded was in collaboration with Vang Pao, who was a major drug smuggling warlord.
Along with being a staunch anti-communist, Vang Pao also controls massive fields of poppies, which he harvests and refines into heroin. So a bargain is made.
When Americans are risking their lives in war, it is the responsibility of their leaders to take some risks.
One of those risks involves the CIA partnering with Pao's ragtag army to fight a secret war against the communists. In exchange, the CIA helps Pao move his drugs out of the country using an agency-owned passenger and cargo airline called Air America.
Air Force aerial port personnel under constant enemy fire, load and offload.
Turning a blind eye to ongoing heroin smuggling by their forces, and then also, using that income stream to help fund this secret war.
Vang Pao's heroin then makes its way to the West with the help of New York gangsters and their old connections in Marseille, a smuggling route immortalized in the movie The French Connection. By the early 70s, America's inner cities are flooded with smack.
Every day I had taken heroin.
For a year and a half?
Yes.
How much was it costing you?
Well, I really couldn't say, but it cost enough to kill myself.
But it won't be the last time the U.S. government strikes a devil's bargain in pursuit of a strategic foreign policy goal. Three decades after Vietnam, another war. This one, a so-called war on terror, will see America once again climb into bed with some of the world's biggest heroin producers.
The story begins with the Soviet invasion, occupation of Afghanistan. The U.S. starts to support these Mujahideen groups, and these Mujahideen parties are the U.S. allies in the process of destroying the Afghan communist revolution. Part of how the Mujahideen groups are funding their effort is through exporting opium poppy that's then refined into heroin. Again, it's the smuggling networks for weapons and supplies and personnel facilitate the smuggling of drugs. But the Mujahideen have created such misery and horror that this fanatical, puritanical force arises out of the south of Afghanistan, the Taliban. They eventually control most of Afghanistan. They give sanctuary to Osama bin Laden. Then, after 9/11, the U.S. returns, coming after Osama bin Laden. The U.S. drives out the Taliban. Who is the U.S. going to use as local allies? Well, those Mujahideen parties.
Once again, our military leaders make a bargain that will haunt American cities and citizens for years to come.
I want to remind you that while today's operations are visible, many other operations may not be so visible.
Kandahar Province, southern Afghanistan, 2001. As the U.S. military is fighting a deadly Taliban insurgency, they make a powerful ally, the brother of the U.S.-installed president.
Hamid Karzai's brother, Wali Karzai, is a major drug dealer, and everybody knew that. The government of Afghanistan was a government of drug dealers. And the U.S. turned a blind eye to that reality.
It's an open secret that our troops are protecting Karzai's poppy fields. Even right-wing news stations are covering our military's strange assignment.
We are tolerating the cultivation of the opium because we know that if we were to destroy it now, the population would turn against the Marines and it would be a real security risk.
And that was at the heart of the failure of any kind of nation-building effort in Afghanistan.
After 2001, the global distribution of heroin explodes under America's watch.
If the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime estimated in the early 2000s that 92% of world heroin supply was sourced from Afghanistan, then presumably some of it reached the U.S.
The timing couldn't have been worse. By the 20-teens, opioid use has reached epidemic levels, leaving the door wide open for a cheaper street drug to gain hold.
Health officials are concerned about oxy addicts making the switch to heroin, both experienced users and especially those using the drug for the first time.
In 2007, news breaks that the Department of Justice finally seems to have caught up with the Sackler family's company, Purdue Pharma.
Purdue had admitted it falsely promoted OxyContin as less addictive by, among other means, claiming the drug's slow-release formula did not cause a buzz or euphoria and could be used to weed out addicts.
The corporate giant faces an array of criminal and civil charges for falsely marketing its drug, OxyContin, as less addictive than other opioids.
Purdue Pharma's top executives, Michael Friedman, president and CEO, and the company's medical director, Paul Goldenheim, and lawyer, Howard Udell. All three executives and the company pled guilty in the U.S. to misleading regulators, physicians, and patients.
As punishment for misbranding OxyContin as a cure-all for any type of pain, Purdue is forced to pay $634 million, a record for a pharmaceutical company, but a mere fraction of the Sackler family fortune earned off of the drug. The company has cut a plea deal with the government. None of the company's executives are sentenced to prison, and no one from the Sackler family is personally implicated in the charges.
More than 70,000 people died of overdoses last year, the largest number ever recorded.
While Purdue's 2007 settlement with the feds was a slap on the wrist for the drug maker, it's a punch in the gut to their victims and their families. And in the 20-teens, as the healthcare industry finally cracks down on dirty doctors writing shady scripts, and law enforcement shuts down the last of the pill mills, hundreds of thousands of addicts are left desperate for a fix.
Dan, there you go. Come on, man. There you go. Oh, there you go. That Narcan got him.
In the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia, residents reckon with the horrors of a still out-of-control heroin epidemic. Rosalind Pichardo has been working with users on these streets for years, saving one life at a time, sometimes with news cameras in tow.
Come on, sunshine. Yo, there we go. If we weren't around, he would have died.
Many of the users here tell a similar story. They started down the road to addiction with the Sacklers' OxyContin pills.
So I started at the painkillers, and there's a lot of crooked doctors out here that would take cash and give you them medicine, and then it just went on and went on and on. Once I found out that heroin was cheaper, it got worse.
And as pill addicts move to cheaper and easier to obtain heroin, they find much of the product is laced with the highly potent synthetic painkiller fentanyl.
When I was doing heroin early 2000s, dude, people were dying. They weren't dying like they are now. I thought heroin was bad back then. This is the hardest thing I've ever tried to come off. I'm literally scared to try to come off of this drug. It's so addicting, so strong, and it's scary to even think about trying to come off of it.
Pichardo and other activists see this epidemic that began with prescription pills as a public health crisis where saving lives should be the first priority. They propose opening the country's first ever safe injection site.
What the safe consumption sites mean for me is a place where people can use drugs safely, but also have services, having doctors on board in case someone ODs, to know that if someone wants to use drugs, they can, but they won't die.
The people like me, they can have a safe spot to use what they gotta use and do what they gotta do and go. But I think that would be great.
But a federal judge declares the Kensington safe injection site proposal illegal, citing the 1986 so-called crack house statute that makes it a felony to knowingly use a location for distribution of a controlled substance.
For the government to think that a safe consumption site is a crack house is ludicrous. A safe consumption site's not giving drugs. They're already bringing their drugs. We're just making sure that when they use their drugs, they come out alive.
And while efforts like Pichardo's are stymied by the government's unrelenting and unsuccessful war on drugs, a decade after the Justice Department's sweetheart deal with the Sackler family, efforts to finally hold them personally accountable for the crisis they helped to create have yet to succeed.
I have to wonder if it turns out that the Sackler family, and there are some hints right now that they have moved around money to protect it, knowing that there could be potential future litigation.
Members of the Sackler family began making transfers of money out of the company. They transferred up to $10 billion out of the company and into their own network of trusts.
The Sackler name was hammered off the building in front of a group of people, mostly Tufts medical school students. The name came down, you can hear those cheers.
The members of the Sackler family who owned and at times ran Purdue Pharma have tried to escape the public spotlight in the years since their 2007 plea deal. But that was all about to change.
I think it's clear that your family has tried to fraudulently shield money for your own personal benefit. I think it's appalling. Those profits, in my opinion, should be clawed back.
The House Committee on Oversight and Reform hold a virtual hearing to investigate the role Purdue Pharma and members of the Sackler family had played in America's ongoing opioid crisis.
I'll ask you again, will you apologize for the role you played in the opioid crisis?
Despite all the misery and death directly tied to their product, both Kathy Sackler and her cousin David take no responsibility.
I have asked myself over many years, I have tried to figure out, is there anything that I could have done differently, knowing what I knew then, not what I know now? And I have to say, there's nothing that I can find that I would have done differently.
I believe I conducted myself legally and ethically, and I believe the full record will demonstrate that.
An estimated 800,000 Americans have died from opioid-related deaths since 1999. The true cost of over 20 years of death and destruction seems incalculable. But by 2018, public pressure to hold the Sackler family accountable was now impossible to ignore. A dramatic protest inside the Sackler wing at New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Fund rehab! Fund rehab!
And in the courts, thousands of lawsuits from families and state governments demanding restitution are stacking up. Feeling the heat, in November 2020, the Justice Department announces they have reached a new deal with the family.
The global settlement announced today involves the company pleading guilty to 3 felony counts for defrauding the United States.
It could be the largest settlement ever paid by private citizens.
Resolution also requires tens of millions of documents to be made public about the role that Purdue and the Sacklers played in the opioid crisis.
If this seems like a win for the government, it isn't.
Members of the Sackler family transferred up to $10 billion out of the company and into their own network of trusts. When we talk about the settlement, that's a fraction of what they took out of the company.
With an estimated family fortune of $11 billion and payments scheduled over 9 years, the settlement can be paid off with interest alone. And while the 487-page bankruptcy deal calls for the Sacklers to relinquish control of Big Pharma, which is reformed as a new entity whose profits will go towards those who have suffered, Sackler family members are all given immunity from any future prosecution. It's a shocking outcome that makes news across the country.
In a landmark ruling Wednesday, a federal bankruptcy judge in New York granted immunity from opioid lawsuits to members of the Sackler family. They're the owners of Big Pharma.
Even the judge who signed the final deal called it a bitter result. After all the death and destruction, one thing remains clear. The Sackler family appears untouchable.
And so when we look back on the opioid crisis, the story of the Sacklers and OxyContin and Big Pharma, it's hard not to see this as a parable not about how the government can't be effective, but about how if you take the brakes off of corporate power, the government can't be effective.
Our government's misguided alliances with drug traffickers facilitated the importation of heroin into this country and helped set the stage for the opioid era and the return to heroin we're living through now. Allowing drug makers like Purdue to flood our neighborhoods with their pills only added fuel to the fire. And it's all a uniquely American problem.
A lot of people are in denial. So I think that if people would come here with an open mind and an open heart to see what we see, hopefully that would change their mind.
Obviously it's not over. It's still burning through our society. We're all paying the price.